It was June when the voyage began, leaving Strangford Lough and heading off to the high Arctic.
Greenland crew are off to Greenland by the Faroes and East Iceland. Greenland crew are off to Greenland.
With the crew and boats settled for the passage, the overall plan had a sobering effect on the excitement of departure. We'd head north, first to the remote Scottish island of St Kilda, then to the Faroes, on to Iceland, and when the moment was right, set off for the cold coast of Greenland. So St Kilda it was, but with a purpose: to retrace the voyages of St Brendan and St Columba 1200 years ago, as they sought sanctuary in the most remote places of the earth. It's hard to imagine the difficulties faced by those early Irish mariners as they put to sea in their leather boats with linen sails. All they had were the stars and the ocean currents and the winds to aid their navigation. With St Kilda on the bow, we picked up a passenger.
This is a bird that's probably gone astray. It's lost its powers of sort of orientation, I would think, which is absolutely fundamental for these birds to be able to find themselves from one side of the world to the other.
Ashore now, amidst the ruins of the deserted main street of what was the village before its evacuation in the 30s, we found signs of those early monks.
St Kilda is widely regarded as the most remote outpost of Western Europe, and here we see, built into this 19th century house, evidence for a 6th or 7th century Irish cross slab, carved here in granite. I think this is real tangible evidence that people came from the western seaboard of Ireland. This slab is the sort of thing that you would find anywhere up the coast of Ireland, from Kerry through Galway, Mayo or Donegal.
We pressed on to the Faroes, where the Viking culture was clear to see. And here again, thoughts of what drove those early Christian travellers to these remote islands on the western seaboard.
I think there were two things that sent them overseas. There was the mission to Christianise people where they lived, but there was also the thing of finding out places of solitude and where you could have quiet, reflective prayer. And this whole Faroe landscape was lying here for thousands of years, belonging only to the birds.
Soon it was back to sea, bound now for Iceland. The midnight sun was starting to show, giving round-the-clock daylight, part of the reason flowers abound on the otherwise barren slopes of the volcanic hills.
As a biologist, what I find absolutely fantastic about this Icelandic landscape is that it's so big and wild. It's like stepping back some 10,000 years, back in the British Isles and Ireland, when the Ice Age moved away from us all that time ago. This was the very sort of vegetation that we had, right down to our sea levels.
And all that in Iceland was only for starters. There were the birds, the landscape, the people, all of them putting the thoughts of Greenland further and further away. By early June, the Iceland rivers were in full spate as the ice melted and the summer took hold. A crew change, and the prospect now of getting into position for the jump to Greenland when the moment was right. But first, a look at what we were leaving behind. In places, fishing villages, idle now that the season was over. Tourist meccas where the overlanders came with their specially equipped vehicles. There were mountains that looked as though they should have been in the desert. And there were Arctic terns that took no prisoners if you went near their nest sites. The locals showed us how to do it. And there were other species, so gentle they were captivating.
Well, this is really quite an Arctic speciality. It's a redneck phalarope, and aren't they just beautiful little birds? I think they're so delicate and so beautifully coloured, it's just wonderful. They have an amazing lifestyle as well. I mean, they're feeding here on quite a fast flowing stream. And you can watch them picking up little mosquito larvae and midges that have got caught in the water.
It was easy to postpone the point of departure for Greenland. The wildlife, the lure of the landscape. With sights like these, who could rush? But soon we're going to have to put out to sea. We're going to have to head off toward Greenland. We can't put that decision off much longer, and as soon as there's the right window in the weather and the conditions seem correct for us to go, we'll have to head off into the unknown. We took the water temperature every few hours. When it dropped to near zero, there would be ice. A small growler was only a hint of what was to come. The problem was the big ones, the bergs, would probably be invisible as they sneaked up in the fog. This was the Denmark Straits, as hostile a bit of ocean as you're likely to get. Cold, frightening, unforgiving. Sure enough, there they were, floating mountains of ice, creating their own weather systems. Then, late one night, a strange cloud formation, only it wasn't cloud. That was land, distorted by light refraction.
There it is. There's Greenland. Out there.
I was resigned not to seeing this sight, and it's far better than I expected at any rate. But after the dismal conditions of the last few days, that is absolutely magnificent. There is a God after all.
And we've been through all this rain and fog and mist and bad sea, and now it's looking almost tranquil in spite of the fact that these vast mountains are there. It's brilliant! We've done it!
We'd done it, or so we thought. We should have met the pack ice 30 miles out. By now, we should have been in the thick of it, working our way toward the shore. We'd got in further than we had dared hope. It's probable no human being had ever set foot on that coastline. We could be the first. We've come over 1,000 miles to possibly one of the most inhospitable, bleak, empty, barren and stunningly wonderful coastlines you could possibly imagine. Now we've got here, what do we find? Pack ice, solid, dense, totally impenetrable. So it wasn't to be. We accepted that. Nature had decided. But the memories, the adventure, the delights of the Arctic, that made it all worthwhile.